So this is the first video that I'm going to do for a handful of end of the year / new year videos. This is going to be an overview of basically my reading and my watching. I have a bunch of like statistics basically and like just fun information for what I watched and what I read in 2022. I'm not sure about the order of like when I'll be putting videos out, but the other videos that I have planned besides this one are a tier ranking of all the books that I read this past year, and then my favorite and standout movies and TV shows I watched, and then lastly a 2023 goals video for what I'm thinking about reading and how I'm thinking about focusing my reading and my watching. So, like, you know, movies and TV shows, all that. I also realized I didn't even think about, like, music. And, you know, I love to incorporate music, but, like, K-pop is so iffy to actually put in videos. So I don't know if I'm going to, especially since my Christmas vlog included, like, all K-pop songs. If I do it, I'm thinking maybe, like, a top albums. I hate using the word top, though, because, like, what does that even mean? Like, that's so vague, because that could be, like, your favorite, that could be, like, the best, and that's such a, I mean, it could be a combination of the two, so. Anyway, my favorite albums, possibly, I will be doing, but if I don't, regardless, in the description, if you want to know more about everything, my Letterboxd and Goodreads are always in the description, and I will also put my Spotify Wrapped playlist, the one that they make for your top songs of the year, in case I don't end up sharing, like, favorite music. Just know, Gaslighting by Only One Of, one word, Only One Of, capital O's, top song, for sure. Number one song of 2022. It's been my, like, number one song on my on repeat playlist for, like, 8 months. That's a little ridiculous. I was actually surprised I didn't listen to it more times. Like, during the Spotify Wrapped, when it's like, you listen to the song, I think it's at 264 times, and I was like, are you sure about that? Because I'm pretty sure it's more. Anyway, let's get started. I'm going to start with the movies because I have less information here, and I will list all the books that I read, since that list is obviously not as long as what I watched. Oh yeah, by the way, this is basically just me talking this whole time, so I'm not gonna, like, be doing a lot of visual stuff. It's me sitting here, probably mostly looking at these papers in front of me. So, my year in movies, I logged 240 things overall. That's how many diary entries I made on Letterboxd. 174 of these entries, maybe is that the word I should use? Because there's, like, various things that, you know, you log. You know, there's all sorts of things, technically, that are on Letterboxd that are not just feature films. So, I guess entries? Or things is what I'm going to be saying. Yeah, so 174 of these were first-time watches, which means there were 66 things that I rewatched. Then I clicked the heart on 164 things that I logged. The way that I feel like everyone kind of uses it differently, in the same way that they have their own, like, rating system, because there's a handful of people that I follow that, like, rarely click the heart. Maybe they just, like, reserve that for indicating all-time favorites, but I'm pretty, like, lenient with it. I can give movies that I thought were, like, enjoyable and, like, fine, but I would rewatch them. That's kind of, like, a key factor. If I'm contemplating whether or not I should click the heart, it's usually me asking myself if I would rewatch it, and if I would, then I click the heart. But something can be like a 3 out of 5 star movie, and I'll click the heart because I enjoyed it enough and liked it enough, but maybe it wasn't, like, that great. And then, of course, if something's 5 out of 5 stars, I'll probably click the heart. Though, there are a good number of movies that I've watched that I thought were, like, very well done, but I would, like, never watch again. And in that case, I would probably give it, like, a 4 out of 5, and then not click the heart. And that's kind of how you know. That's my sort of system of using Letterboxd and rating and clicking the heart. I don't know what else to say besides clicking the heart. Is there something else I can call it? So, of what I watched, I wrote 108 reviews, which also varies. Sometimes it can be like between a 3.5 and a 4, but I'm gonna go with the 4 because of the costumes or something like that. Like extra half star because of the production design and costumes. I say that a lot. It could be something like that. It could be a couple of sentences. It could be a couple of paragraphs, or it could be the beginnings of an essay. Reviews definitely vary as well, but I wrote 108 of them. 72 of the things, essentially, I watched on the Criterion channel. I did include, in the 72, I did include things that I own that are on Criterion or in the Criterion collection, or that I noticed on the channel at some point after I watched it. Or like maybe even before I watched it, but it was on the Criterion channel at some point this year. Yeah, okay. And then 44 things were for my Filmy Hour marathon group. We don't really call ourselves like the Filmy Hour, but that's what our group chat is called on Voxer, and that's what my like letterbox list is for everything we've ever watched, what our schedules have been comprised of. But I usually just say like my movie marathon group, so that's what I'm talking about. And if you're new or don't know, have never heard me mention my movie marathon group, we just have a movie marathon every month. We usually have a theme, and we each recommend like 3 movies. We vote on the movies, and then each of us has like 1 movie for the marathon. So it depends on how many people are participating that month in the marathon. That's how many movies we have. And whether or not I watch something mostly has to do with like if it's available to me, if I want to sleep in more, because for me they start really early. And sometimes if I have already seen a movie, I'll just opt to like nap during it or sleep in still. So 44 movies I watched for the Filmy Hour marathon group, but we did watch more movies than that. There are just ones that I didn't watch. 8 things were supplements or featurettes or behind the scenes documentaries. So then I have a breakdown of the decades. From the 1910s, I watched 10 things. From the 1920s, I watched 1 thing. From the 1930s, I watched 3 things. From the 1940s, I watched 4 things. From the 1950s, I watched 7 things. From the 1960s, I watched 32 things. That's such a jump. From the 1970s, I watched 34 things. From the 1980s, I watched 21 things. From the 1990s, I watched 31 things. From the 2000s, early 2000s, I watched 40 things. From the 2010s, I watched 35. And from the 2020s, I watched 21 things. I didn't count how many movies I watched from like 2022 specifically, but I'm sure it's like 5 because I'm really bad with keeping up with new releases. And sometimes when I think my brother's going to be interested in something, I'll just like wait for a good time for both of us to watch it together. And then also, of course, I will put off adaptations if I have not read the source material and I'm interested in reading the source material. And then lastly, I have a breakdown of the ratings that I gave. So I didn't give anything half a star, 1 star, or 1.5 stars. 4 things I gave 2 stars. 4 things I gave 2.5 stars. 34 things I gave 3 stars. 74 things I gave 3.5 stars. Yeah, I think that's by far my like most common rating is 3.5. 60 things got 4 stars. 28 things got 4.5. And 3 things got 5 stars. And I already know what those are. They're all rewatches of The Graduate, Harold and Maude, and Twin Peaks. Twin Peaks, I think it's like the pilot, the international pilot, because that was like a TV movie. That's why there's an entry for Twin Peaks besides the Return limited series, in case you're wondering. So yeah, I just usually log that whenever I watch the pilot of Twin Peaks, which is at least one of the Twin Peaks days. Every year. I watch it at least one time every year, so... and then 33 things I didn't rate. Often shorts or the sort of behind the scenes stuff I won't rate. And then I think that's it. Moving on to books, my 2022 reading. I read 44 books, which is great because that's my, at least in terms of the number of books that I've read, that is my best reading year, which is, it's so fantastic. It's given me like such motivation for like this year. So I had 2 goals. I will go over a little bit of my goals from like mostly in my 2023 goals video. I'll be talking more about like how I felt about my reading and watching this year and go over goals that I set in 2022, though I'm kind of silly because I don't really go back and look at what I gave myself as goals. But the one goal that I do make every year for reading is a number. For the last few years, it's been like a loose number goal and a strict number goal. Or I guess I should say that the other way around. A strict number goal and a loose number goal. So my strict number goal was 36 books. So at the very least, I wanted to read 36 books. And if I surpassed 36, then my goal was 52 books, which is a book a week. And I feel like that has been like the number I've been trying to reach for the past couple of years now. And I think I can do it this year because 44 books is actually right in between. It's exactly in the middle of 36 and 52. So I think I can do it. And 36, I'm pretty sure, was my best reading year previously. I think from 2017. That's how many books I read in 2017, which I'd be interested. I should look at my Goodreads again because though sometimes like the page numbers is not as accurate. I know that there's going to be some faults and flaws in the way that like Goodreads has their information and what their database is like compared to like actually looking at all my books physically. But I do think that 2017 was kind of a better reading year. Okay, actually I would positively say that. Not only because of what I was originally going to say with, I read a lot of like larger books that year, even though I read 36 books. Compared to like this year of reading 44 books, there's a good number of shorter books that I read. And so I think in terms of like page number and like amount of reading I did, 2017 still like reigns in that area. But I also think that I read so many good books in 2017. And I guess, spoiler for like my goals video, I wish this reading year was better, even though I did rate a lot of things like kind of higher. I think my average, I should have written my average. My average rating I think was like 3.74 according to Goodreads, but like a high 3, which is still good. But I wish there were more like memorable and like more books that I read that I'm like more passionate about. And so that's another reason why I'm saying like 2017 probably still is the best reading year that I've had. Anyway, I read 44 books though, and I'm really proud of myself, and that has like given me a lot of motivation for reading this year. So, the books that I read, very quickly, I will mention if something is like a play or a short story collection or like a graphic novel or a comic series. That's what I'm going to specify as I'm going down the list. But if something is like a novel, I'm like not going to say anything. I'm just going to say the title and the author. This is also in chronological order of, January to December. The Crucible by Arthur Miller, which is a play. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight by unknown. We don't know who wrote it. And this is an epic poem. Moll Flanders by Daniel Defoe. Oh, also, okay. If I listen to it on audiobook, I also have the audiobook narrator. I do have this book physically, but to kind of like finish it and keep a good pace, I ended up listening to an audiobook for a portion of the ending, which was narrated by Janet Sussman. Sorry. The Graduate by Charles Webb. The Vanishing Act of Esme Lennox by Maggie O'Farrell. I listened to an audiobook which was narrated by Anne Flosnick. A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett. A Line to Kill, which is the third book in the Hawthorne and Horowitz, is it detective series or is it just Hawthorne and Horowitz? I'm not sure, but that series, this is the third book in that series by Anthony Horowitz, and I listened to the audiobook narrated by Rory Kinnear. Then I have Heartstoppers Volume 1, 2, 3, and 4, all by Alice Oseman. This is a comic series, and this is like the volumes. Love by Elizabeth von Arnim. I was listening to the audiobook of this narrated by Eleanor Braun, but I did end up getting a physical copy like halfway through it. So I was like simultaneously reading at the same time that I was listening to it. Same thing with My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. I have the book, but I also heard really great things about the audiobook, so I read it along with listening. And that is narrated by Emily Wu Zeller. Six Moral Tales by Eric Romer. And this is the short story collection that comes in like the Criterion Six Moral Tales box set. The Children's Hour by Lillian Hellman. This is a play. Marilyn in Manhattan, Her Year of Joy by Elizabeth Winder. My Week with Marilyn and The Prince, the Showgirl, and Me by Colin Clark. Technically, that's like a bind-up of like two separate publications. Marilyn and Me, A Photographer's Memories by Lawrence Schiller. Woman Eating by Claire Coda. The Stepford Wives by Ira Levin. Rest and Be Thankful by Emma Glass. Nimona, which on like the physical copy, it says Noelle Stevenson, but on Goodreads, their name is N.D. Stevenson. I think that is like the new name that they go by, because I do know that they have they, them pronouns. So I'm going to say by N.D. Stevenson. And this is a graphic novel. The Girl with the Golden Eyes by Honoré de Balzac. Night Bitch by Rachel Yoder. Weird Fucks by Lynn Tillman. The Longest Journey by E.M. Forster. My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh. Women Talking by Miriam Taves. Vampire Academy, the first book in the Vampire Academy series by Rochelle Mead. Frostbite, the second book in the Vampire Academy series by Rochelle Mead. Loteria by Mario Alberto Zambrano. I don't know Spanish, and I was like partially attempting an accent there. Sorry. And that I was listening to an audiobook narrated by Maria Cabezas. Shadow Kiss, the third book in the Vampire Academy series by Rochelle Mead. The Pit and the Pendulum by Edgar Allan Poe, which is just that short story that I read. The Age of Henry VIII by Dale Hoke. And this is one of the Great Courses audiobooks. It's basically college course lectures on audiobook. It does also come with like a PDF file that you can download as well that has a bunch of information and gives you like extra resources, which I think is really cool. Fangs by Sarah Henderson, and this is a graphic novel. And The Trees Crept In by Don Kurtikich. I read this physically along with listening to the audiobook narrated by Polly Lee. Cinderella or The Little Glass Slipper. I just can't right now with French pronunciation, so just Charles Perrault. So Charles is such a hard name to like say in French. It's the RL. It gets me every time. Can't do it. We're not doing it today. So that story. Burnt Offerings by Robert Marasco. I listened to the audiobook narrated by R.C. Bray. Vathic by William Beckford. The Elephant Man by Bernard Pomerantz, and this is a play. The Vampire Armand. Technically, Goodreads will tell you that this is the 6th book in the Vampire Chronicles, but really it's the 7th if you're thinking about everything overall, because the next book that I read was Vittorio the Vampire, which is the 2nd book in the New Tales of the Vampire series, the first of which being Pandora, but those are the only 2 books in this like New Tales series, and if you want everything Vampire Chronicles related, then Pandora is the 6th book, The Vampire Armand is the 7th book, and then Vittorio the Vampire is the 8th. I'm just going with the overall numbers of The Vampire Armand being book 7 and Vittorio the Vampire being book 8. And of course those are by Anne Rice. And I listened to the audiobooks for both. I do have The Vampire Armand physically, so that was the first time that I got to like physically read the words that Anne Rice wrote, which was great. But I did listen to the audiobook along with reading physically, and both of those audiobooks actually were narrated by Jonathan Moroz. M-A-R-O-S-Z. Moroz? Being There by, I actually do think it's Jerzy Kaczynski, but in watching like the supplements on the Being There Criterion release, people kept saying Jersey. And I think he just like accepted people saying Jersey. But I feel like, where is he from? Poland? I feel like it's actually pronounced Jersey. Because I did look up a pronunciation, and people were pronouncing it like that. But then, like, Dick Cavett was introducing him as Jersey. So I'm not exactly sure which to say. But being there, and I read that physically, along with listening to an audiobook narrated by Dustin Hoffman. That's available on YouTube, actually. I'll link it in the description. And finally, The Power of the Dog by Thomas Savage, which I literally finished on New Year's Eve. I had like the last chapter to read, which was like 25 pages, and I finished it on New Year's Eve. Great. So those are all the books that I read, and overall, I read 20 novels, so anything that was like not a part of a series or not a play, just like a standalone novel. 20 of those. 3 plays, which actually were like spaced out pretty evenly. I read one in the beginning of the year, one during the summer, and one at the end of the year. 6 comics or graphic novels. Comic volumes. That's what I should call them. Comic volumes and graphic novels. 4 nonfiction books. 2 short stories and 1 short story collection. 11 books that are a part of series. 12 audiobooks I listened to total, but 5 of them were alone. So 7 of the books that I listened to I also had physically and was reading along with the audiobook. And 1 epic poem I read. And then for kind of more of a genre breakdown, I wrote down 4 things here. I read 11 classics, 6 modern classics, and the way that I think about modern classics are pretty much like end of World War II, like beginning of Cold War, into like the 80s. I kind of start thinking of like the 90s, and maybe, I don't know, the end of what I consider to be like modern classics period is kind of iffy, just because there are certain more popular, more, you know, well-known titles that I feel like have maybe like surpassed what I would consider like now to be sort of like contemporary classic time, where certain authors and certain books we know will be future classics, but they just have to like stand the test of time a little bit longer. There are definitely some books like within the 80s and 90s that I feel like we could consider modern classics, but it really sort of depends. But I really think of like the 80s as like the end of modern classics, because I think about it also like in terms of art, and like modern society also. Modern art and modern living really, honestly, I associate it a lot with television and sort of that like nuclear family, white picket fence sort of scenario. Very ideal Americana, but that's what I think about in terms of that decade, and that time has really like cemented itself in the way that we live now, and it is the foundation of the way that we are today. Obviously that was built on many centuries before, but I'm just saying modern living. So anyway, that was like such a tangent, but anyway, I also read 10 YA books and 8 things that I consider to be like contemporary literary fiction. The series that I was reading books from include The Vampire Chronicles, Vampire Academy. The Graduate is actually technically a series, though I just read it only as like a standalone novel. I'm not going to continue. I don't know. I'm not going to continue, but like it could be interesting to read the sequel that Charles Webb decided to write. So yes, there is a sequel, and technically that makes it a series. The Graduate. Heartstopper, of course, and the Hawthorne and Horowitz detective series. So five series, though I'm not including The Graduate technically, that I am currently in the middle of. Heartstopper only has 1 more volume that's coming out later this year, so then that'll be complete. 31 of the authors that I read were first-time authors, and I think I'm pretty sure I did count this as authors and not books, just because like I hadn't read Rochelle Mead before, so technically she was a first-time author, but I read 3 of the Vampire Academy books, so I didn't count her like 3 times. I just counted her once. just for clarification there. And so then 7 of the authors that I read this past year were authors that I had already read from before. And technically, I mean, like, The Pit and the Pendulum was a reread for me. Actually, yeah, that's the only thing that I have here for a reread. And then, of course, I had to include that there are 31 books with adaptations. So these could be, I wrote down, as of January 2023, they are produced, in production, in pre-production, in development, or already released. So 31 out of 44 have adaptations. Though that also, like, kind of includes, like, The Vampire Armand and Vittorio the Vampire in terms of AMC has the rights to them. I don't know how, obviously we'll have to see how far they get in making adaptations of the Vampire Chronicles. And then for my star ratings, I didn't give anything 1 star. Goodreads also, by the way, doesn't have, like, half stars, so this is, I just wrote down what I rated the books. I didn't look at my reviews to see if something was more, so along the lines of, like, 3.5 or 2.5. It's just to the rounded star. I didn't give anything 1 star. I gave 3 things 2 stars. I gave 13 things 3 stars. I gave 22 things 4 stars. And I gave 5 things 5 stars. And then one thing I did not rate. And then the longest thing that I read was Shadowkiss, the 3rd book in the Vampire Academy series, which was 443 pages. Though, yeah, including, like, the books that I listened to on audiobook, I'm pretty sure they're also shorter physically than 443 pages. And then the shortest thing that I read was The Pit and the Pendulum, which was 12 pages. So I think that's everything. Yeah, I guess that's it. Here's an overview of what I read and what I watched. Again, mostly in statistics. You can hear more of my, like, thoughts and feelings on the things that I watched and read in the other videos that I'll be doing. Mainly my goals video, I'll be discussing that a little bit more, again, in terms of an overview. And then for specific titles, I'll talk more about those in the tier ranking video and favorites/standouts video for movies and shows. How do I end this? Because I don't necessarily want to ask you, like, what your favorite books and movies were, because that's what I'm going to ask for the other videos. Well, I guess you can just write whatever you want to write in the comments, whatever information you want to put in terms of your reading and what you watched this year. Maybe, like, how you did on your goals. How many books did you read? I don't know what questions to ask, because I always ask questions at the end of my videos, but I know that I'm going to be asking them in the next ones that I make. So I guess, I probably should have said this in the beginning, but, like, the year is over now, so I just feel like I should thank everyone for watching my videos throughout the year and for subscribing if you subscribed this past year and, like, previous years, whenever you subscribe. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for watching my videos and for commenting, liking, sharing, anything that you do in terms of interaction and engagement. I really appreciate it, and I'm very thankful. And thank you for watching this video. And I'll see you in the next. Bye! Actually, I forgot something. I forgot to mention that there were a number of books that I started or continued reading in 2022. These are the ones that I wrote down, but honestly, there were other books that I, like, kind of started and then didn't, I don't know, it wasn't the right time for that book, or for whatever reason, I didn't, like, really get that into it, or it wasn't something that I was really necessarily planning on reading in that moment, if that makes sense. Like, all of these books here that I have written are things that I was, like, really planning on reading, or they're short story collections that I started, you know, I read a story here, I read a story there, that kind of thing. I'll just go through them. But specifically, I at least need to mention Women in Dark Times by Jacqueline Rose and Music for Chameleons by Truman Capote, because these are 2 books that I specifically read certain sections of because they deal, they have to do with Marilyn Monroe in some way. Women in Dark Times is an essay collection, and there's one on Marilyn Monroe. I don't know what it's called. It's right behind me. Let's see if I can get it. It's actually very good. It was incredible. And I haven't read the other essays in it. Okay. Women in Dark Times. It's just called Respect Marilyn Monroe. With like respect, Marilyn Monroe. Yeah. And then Music for Chameleons is way up there. I'm not gonna get it. But there's a section in there that is actually, it's more like a transcript of like a conversation that he had with Marilyn. And oh my goodness gracious, the potty mouth on Marilyn Monroe. I kind of liked it though. And then of course I continued reading Perfume, The Story of a Murderer by Patrick Suskind. It was just, this one just got away from me. I also was so busy during the holidays. So I didn't, I was like downstairs, like hanging out and not up here in my room reading, because it's hard for me to read like around other people if they're having like conversations or watching something. I was gonna finish this in October and then that didn't happen, and then I was like, all right, well, by the end of the year, and it just didn't happen. I also started The Complete Poems by John Keats, which is like 500 pages of poems, so I've just been like overly casually reading this. I really should pick it up a little bit more often. Blonde, of course, by Joyce Carol Oates. The Vampire and Other Tales of the Macabre. So I read The Vampire by John Polidori, but there are other short stories in this collection by other authors that I haven't read yet. Saints and Strangers by Angela Carter. I read 2 of the short stories in this book. I have an edition of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which also includes 2 other stories by Robert Louis Stevenson. And I've read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde before, so it feels like I'm in the middle of this collection, even though I've never actually picked it up since I listened to... no, I've read an e-version. I have a downloaded version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and I was listening to an audiobook at the same time. But it feels like I'm in the middle of this, because technically I've read one of the stories. And then Nutcracker and the Mouse King by E.T.A. Hoffman, and The Tale of the Nutcracker by Alexandre Dumas. I wanted to read these on like Christmas Eve and Christmas, or maybe like, you know, give myself a couple more days around those 2 days. And it just didn't happen. I started it, I got like 25 pages into it between Christmas Eve, Christmas, and the day after Christmas. And it just, I think I'm just going to end up putting it off for next Christmas, to be honest. Next December. No, Christmas. It has to be Christmas Eve. You have to read it on Christmas Eve. And then, really, really, really embarrassing, The Dream Thieves by Maggie Stiefvater. The second book in the Raven Cycle. If you know, you know. And then Wuthering Heights is a book that I actually read. I read like 70 almost pages of like a handful of years ago, and it just like wasn't the right time. I got distracted by other things, and I was kind of confused because I'm pretty sure there are 2 Catherines. I don't know, but I've been meaning to get back to it like ever since, because I was enjoying it despite the confusion and despite me being kind of distracted. And I know I had to put it down for some reason, but I don't remember what reason, and I haven't gone back to it. I would very much like to. So that's why it feels like it's on my list of like books that I'm in the middle of reading, even though I'm going to start it over. Yes. So those, am I going to keep this at the end? I don't know. I already finished filming the video. Where am I going to include this? That's that.